Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is October 6th, 2017. Welcome from Ocean Park, Maine. I was going to head down to the beach today to record the intro because I actually had somebody say I missed the sounds of the surf. So Norm in Seattle had said he'd heard enough of them, but now I'm getting some pushback from the other side. But we will be up here for another 2 or 3 weeks, so we'll have one more sound of the surf for the intro. But I'm running a little late today, this afternoon, because I have to pick Darlene up at a art quilting workshop in Portland, so I need to get cracking here. My guest this week, Stephen Ingraham, lives in Kennebunk. That's just down the road or down the coast from Ocean Park. He is a nature photographer with a teacher's desire to help others learn what he knows about using point-and-shoot cameras to capture the beauty of the natural world. You're going to hear the passion in his voice when he talks about beauty and how important it is to appreciate it through photography and other means.
The concept of beauty cuts across all cultures, everywhere, every kind of people, all economic levels, all, it's universal.
There are a couple of news stories that I've been watching out of the corner of my eye this week. One involved a tax dispute with the European Union. They assessed a big fine on Amazon. That'll be working its way through the legal process. And then Bloomberg had a scoop on an Amazon initiative codenamed Seller Flex, and it's a clever idea. It basically says that they've been trying this out in India for a couple of years and now on the West Coast and perhaps going to roll it out next year. Instead of having a third-party seller's goods transferred to an Amazon fulfillment center, Amazon starts taking over the delivery at the vendor's warehouse, and so it eliminates a step in the delivery process. This sent shares of FedEx and UPS tumbling a bit. One of the items I saw, I was surprised at how little Amazon accounts for the total revenue. I think it was 10% for UPS and something like 2% for FedEx. Obviously, that would make them a very noticeable customer, but it's not as if Amazon continues to do some of its own deliveries, it's going to put an end to FedEx or UPS. Those are huge delivery systems. Here is an excerpt from the Bloomberg reporter that broke this story, Spencer Soper.
So largely they've been addressing costs within their own infrastructure, making their warehouses as efficient as possible. They have robots in there gathering items, helping people gathering items to make it more efficient. They can sort things by zip code and drop them directly to the Postal Service for the last mile of delivery. That's another attempt at efficiency. And the big step here is they're saying, wait a minute, do we need that extra step? Do we need to bring the goods from the merchant's facility to ours and then to the customer? What if we skip that step and go right from the merchant's facility to the customer? This is them experimenting on that.
Good reporting by Bloomberg. Bloomberg's coverage of Amazon strikes me as some of the most in-depth and fair. It's just a good, solid reporting, and that's where Brad Stone ended up. He was with the New York Times for a while, and he wrote that book, The Everything Store. I was at the Amazon bookstore in New York City yesterday. I had occasion to fly down there and then back late last night from Portland, and I wanted to see that store. It's a huge store. I suspect it's at least twice as large as the store that I saw in Seattle and the one that I've seen in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. It's right across from the Empire State Building, and as you stand with your back to the Empire State Building, it's a very impressive storefront on a wide street. It's the address is 7 West 34th Street. And it's also the first store that I've been to that has a coffee shop. So I went in and I ordered a trick-or-treat latte, which was being advertised. It had some caramel in it. It was a pretty tasty concoction. There were seats facing out. I'm not sure you could see the top of the Empire State Building from those seats. You're looking straight across at the base of it. And then there were 4 two-top tables. Very presentable area of the store that was a coffee shop, and it was Amazon-ish. It had a link that you could give your feedback to what you thought of the coffee shop experience there at the store. You couldn't pay with your Amazon account the way you can in the store. You had to pay for your latte with cash or with a credit card, and the staff were very sharp and was a pleasant experience. Then I headed over to the store with my latte. It's a high-ceiling space that has nice round light globes hanging down like chandeliers. Everything else is similar to the other stores I've seen. The books are all facing out, and they're arranged in quirky and useful ways to put books in front of you that you might not normally see in a traditional bookstore. And also lots of displays of the devices, actually more display of the hardware than I've seen in other stores. The children's area was quiet. This was about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I guess kids were in school, but there was a nice corner that had books laid out for kids as well. One thing which was predominantly displayed in the store is the current sale for Prime members on Kindles. The sign at the store as you came in highlighted the fact that there's $30 off on the Kindle, the Paperwhite, and the Voyage. So now the Kindle is selling for $50. The Paperwhite Wi-Fi with special offers is $90, and the Voyage Wi-Fi is $170. Those are all $30 off the normal price. One thing which wasn't given as much visibility in the store was the fact that the Oasis is now selling for $50 off for Wi-Fi only, and that's a pretty remarkable sale on that device. I asked the staffer, I said, well, do you think there might be some new Kindles coming out? At the last announcement, there was all these new Echoes, and there's been some Fire tablets, but no Kindles. And she said, well, you just need to stay tuned to the website, and if there's any information about that, I'm sure it'll be available on the website. So she had been well-trained to give the accurate response on that. As I sat in 2 chairs in the middle of the store, there were not a lot of sort of comfy chairs to hang out the way there are at the Tattered Cover and other bookstores that you may be familiar with. But I did find a couple, and when one got free, I sat there, and it was in front of the kind of business section. So I spent some time really looking at all the books that were there, and I was pleased that on the bottom row, Brad Stone's The Everything Store was displayed, and there was a nice blurb, one of the reviews saying that it was a good book. There was a time, of course, when Jeff Bezos' wife Mackenzie wrote a very fiery 1-star review when the book first came out, saying that she was very disappointed and thought it was a very inaccurate account of the book. I think that book's held up pretty well, and Bezos himself in an interview at one point said he thought it was the best description of the culture of the company that he'd seen, and he wasn't going to get dragged into a conflict with his wife over the merits of the book. But anyway, Brad Stone's book available at the Amazon bookstore. For the Tech Tip, I'm glad to report that I have finally managed to get the Alexa calling feature to work. And I don't. It may be that the firmware or the update for the app on my iPhone was just a little slow getting in. But the key aspect of it was on my iPhone, I went into settings, and then when I found the Alexa app, there were settings, and it said allow Amazon Alexa to access, and then one of them was contacts. I had that set to as yes before I had tried that, and I wasn't able to get through to the contacts. But now that I've done that, it seems to be working fine. And let's see if we can call Darlene, and I'll give you a little demo of what it's like. Alexa, call Darlene on cell.
Darlene or Darlene Dieterman?
Yes.
Sorry, what's the full name?
Darlene Dieterman. It's not the right way to pronounce
Call
it.
Darlene Dieterman's mobile, right?
Right.
Okay, Len. Calling.
I'm a little reluctant to call her during a workshop, but we've got to arrange for my going there to help pack up.
Choo-choo.
Hey, actually, I'm recording this to show how I can call you from the Echo. I finally get that to work, but I also want to confirm, you want me to be there at 4?
Yeah, I think that'll work great. We're going to be down to 4 of us. So, but I know Tom will be here at 4 to start closing up. So.
All right. I'll got a half an hour. I'm trying to get the audio done, so I won't be taking up any time while people are trying to sleep tonight recording.
That'd be good.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. So the way that works is everybody who's in my contacts list on the phone, I can make calls this way, and I can do it from all the other Echo devices. I could use the Echo downstairs or the Dot, and this is pretty cool, I have to say. There was a good article, and I have a link to it in the show notes that, let's see, that was from AFTnews, and it was forwarded to me by Richard Lopez. Much appreciated. Tom Semple emailed me with information about the Audible app that's now available for Fire TV. It can do quite a number of things: adjust playback speed, set a sleep timer. It doesn't give you Audible channels, which is the sort of podcast-like content from Audible that I find some great shows there. But you can use Fire TV to access your Audible content with some limitations. You might want to check that out. Stephen Ingraham, a retired teacher, is a birder, photographer, blogger, part-time ambassador for Zeiss, the legendary optics and lens manufacturer. 19 days ago, Stephen published a clear, useful, and beautifully illustrated guide to shooting nature photos with point-and-shoot cameras. It's available in print and ebook at Amazon.com. The title is Point and Shoot Nature Photography. I traveled 2 exits down the main turnpike from Ocean Park on Tuesday of this week, October 3rd, to visit with Stephen in the kitchen of his home, where he served me a mug of South African rooibos tea. I began by asking how he first got interested in photography.
My great aunt was the photographer in the family, and she was, I always tell people, she was the type of photographer who bought a new camera every 2 years in the constant search of one that didn't cut people's heads off.
Why would a camera cut people's heads off?
She just didn't frame properly.
She thought it was the camera.
Right. Yeah. So one that she could use in an effective way so that she didn't continuously cut people's heads off in the picture. So she had a whole drawer full of cameras.
This would be back in the 50s or so? Or?
Oh, yeah. Yes, the 50s. Everything from Kodak roll film to folding cameras to whatever was the current thing, and she was still buying cameras when the Instamatics came out in that continual search. So I was playing with cameras at her house, beginning when I discovered the drawer, and so I was fascinated with cameras and with taking pictures. And when I was maybe 12 years old, she took me to Don Frank's cigar and bookshop. And
that was in what city?
That was in Hoosick Falls, New York, little town, upstate New York. And bought me a Sawyer 120 roll film box camera, the fixed lens and plastic lens, the whole thing.
That's a name I don't recall. Did they go out of business?
Sawyer made box cameras and projectors. They were more famous for slide projectors than they were for their but before Kodak was making slide projectors, you could buy a Sawyer's slide projector. So they're a very old company. So at that time I was 12 years old and we didn't have a lot of money, so she bought me a roll of film, and I made that roll of film last for most of a year.
How many
I knew
exposures?
12 exposures.
Wow.
Because I knew I wasn't going to get another roll of film. And I would have to wait until my aunt was feeling generous enough to process the film in order to see the pictures. So
you had to wait a year before you saw the pictures you took?
Yes, yeah. So, but I started taking pictures then, and then in high school, I knew I liked taking pictures, and they built a new high school in our town. And one of the things they built was a darkroom, on the idea that they could get kids to do all of the darkroom work for the yearbook. So it was a joint project between one of the teachers, who was an avid photographer, and the yearbook people. So they started a camera club, and I joined the camera club. And I dug out of a box somewhere at home, again, a 120 roll film folding camera, an Olympus that my father had brought back from his tour of duty in Korea. And I, bought one of those screw-on telephoto lenses to put on the front of it. It was an old mechanical shutter camera, and I started taking pictures. And then my junior year, I joined the yearbook staff, and they bought a little 35 millimeter single lens reflex, a very inexpensive one, a Koa. And I ended up taking all the pictures for all the underclass pictures and most of the sports pictures for the yearbook, and processing them in our darkroom there at high school. So by the time I was a senior, I was doing all that work for the yearbook. So I became pretty proficient at photography, exposure, and I'm the type of person who, when I get into something, I always buy a book, and then I get magazines. So we had the library, and they had popular photography and modern photography. And I bought at Don Frank's bookshop again a little golden guide to photography. And I read that cover to cover, and then I read all the articles I could find in magazines about photography. And that's the way I learn. I picked up a little bit. When I started reading, I could understand none of it. But by the time I'd read 4 or 5 articles and a book, then I was beginning to get an idea of what it was. So that's how I got into photography. And then I've used just about every kind of camera there is since then.
And professionally, you worked for Zeiss, the lens maker, for quite a while?
For the last 15 years of my career, I worked for Zeiss, yes. I worked for the sports optics division. But I'd been taking pictures for, years by then.
Yeah.
And in college, I submitted pictures to art shows and that kind of stuff. And I had art shows in Gallup, New Mexico when we lived there, and did prints. And so I've done a lot of photography, but never as a professional, always as an amateur.
What was your work before the Zeiss job?
I taught. I taught for most of my career. I've done everything. I've run hi-fi stores. I've run delis. Typical American, I've had probably 4 different careers, but most of the time I taught. And along in the teaching period there, again, 15 years ago, I began to write about bird watching and taking pictures of birds and whatnot. And I got pretty well known in the birding community, because I was reviewing birding optics, and very few people were doing that. And
birding optics would be
binoculars,
binoculars,
and spotting scopes mainly.
Mm-hmm.
And I started a publication to do actual comparisons between binoculars and spotting scopes to give people a better idea of what they were doing when they were shopping. So kind of a consumer reports, but focused particularly on optics for bird watching. And that gained a reputation, and I gained a reputation around the industry as the guy to go to if you wanted to know how optics worked. So then I started writing for birding magazines, and wrote for many years for my own publication and for the birdwatching magazines. And then I was eventually recruited by Zeiss to come and help them rebuild their birding presence. So,
were you more sort of on the marketing side as opposed to designing lenses and things?
I worked with the design team to develop new products, but mostly it was marketing. Mostly it was face-to-face marketing. I was in the field with the product, talking to birders, and then I would bring that information back to the company. So I always said I was the living interface between birders and the company, and between the company and birders.
And this was all before social media.
Social media was coming on, certainly during the last 10 years of the time I worked. I still work part-time for Zeiss, or I travel for them to different destinations. I just came back this weekend from the Great American Birding Expo in Philadelphia. And I'll go to Costa Rica later this month with a Zeiss trip. So,
that's a great vehicle to get you to some wonderful places.
Oh, it's been wonderful. I mean, I always say my hardest job at Zeiss was convincing my boss I was actually working.
Yeah, because you were clearly enjoying what you were doing.
That's right.
Huh. How did you decide, and when did you decide to write the book?
Well, I switched from conventional photographic equipment to point-and-shoot cameras, mainly as digital came in. I never bought actually I've owned one or two high-end digital cameras, but most of the cameras I've owned since digital came in have been what we call point-and-shoot cameras. And I quickly realized that they were much more capable, especially today they make what's called a super zoom, which has a long zoom reach. And for anybody interested in birding and wildlife photography, they enable you to take pictures that would otherwise require a huge investment in equipment in order to get the same sort of results. And because they're point-and-shoot cameras, it's easy. You know, I often have people in my workshops say, "Wait, you're teaching us that we don't have to do anything." And I said, "Yes, that's what I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you that if you trust the camera, let it set it up right, and let it do its proper job, that you can take nature pictures very easily in the field." And I was doing that myself, and then as I took more and more wildlife and nature photos, I realized that, okay, so nobody is actually teaching this. This is like a secret that not everybody knows, that you can actually do this.
Using the point and shoot.
Using point and shoot, right. So I started a website, Point and Shoot Nature Photographer, and started at festivals, because I go to the birding festivals for Zeiss. So I said, I can also do a workshop on using point and shoot cameras for nature photography. So I started teaching, at probably 6 different locations, festivals across the United States, and I enjoyed it. People enjoyed it. People would come, and again, they'd just be totally amazed that you could actually do this without investing an arm and a leg in equipment, and without carrying all that stuff.
Was there any conflict? I think of Zeiss as real high-end lenses and equipment. Was there any dissonance with promoting point-and-shoot technology and also being part of the Zeiss family?
Well, because of the advent of digiscoping, which is using a small point-and-shoot camera behind a spotting scope, that's kind of how I worked it into the company.
Because the spotting scope would have the Zeiss lens in it.
Right, exactly. And I don't feel any real conflict. I'm a pragmatic user of optics. I'm not impressed by big names, even though I work for Zeiss. Mm-hmm. What I'm impressed by is performance and getting high-performing optics and cameras into the hands of as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. So in my tenure at Zeiss, one of the things that I pushed continuously was to create affordable optics with the Zeiss label and the Zeiss quality, and we now have binoculars that start at under $400 with the Zeiss label and the Zeiss quality. So Zeiss is not just a high-end company anymore.
Partly due to your efforts.
Partly due to my efforts, yes. So.
Well, and you talk about a point-and-shoot philosophy, and you referenced it here. Tell me some more about what is that philosophy?
Well, the point-and-shoot philosophy is to allow the camera to do everything that it can, so that you can spend your time just seeing the pictures and taking the pictures. These modern cameras have incredibly sophisticated exposure systems and focus systems, and some of the functions built in, like in-camera HDR, which allows you to take a wide dynamic range photo, and the camera will actually assemble it. It takes 3 pictures, assembles it in the camera to produce a picture that you couldn't have taken in any one exposure.
Now, I've wondered what HDR means on my iPhone up until I read your book and you explained it. So can you explain for people that don't know what that stands for and what it means in layman's terms?
Yes. In a normal single exposure, there will always be whites that are too white and darks that are too dark, because you have to average the exposure, and if you're just taking one exposure, one end of the other will get neglected. You can see it in a landscape, for instance, where you have a very bright sky and a sunlit landscape. In a normal exposure, what you would get is the landscape properly exposed, but there'd be no detail in the clouds at all, because they would just white. They burned out. That's a factor of life. That's the way sensors work. It's the way our eye works too. If you actually pay attention to what you're seeing, if you look up at the clouds, you can see the detail. If you look back down at the landscape, the clouds go kind of white. It's even more critical in a photograph, because the digital sensor doesn't have as broad a dynamic range. It can't record as many lights and darks as our eye sees. So to get by that, you can expose the picture 3 times. You can take a picture with it exposed for the shadows, to give lots of detail in the shadows, one for the midtones, and one for the whites or the brights in the image. And each exposure, the one for the brights would be traditionally underexposed, the one for the shadows would be overexposed, and the one in the middle would be normal exposure. Then back quite a while ago, 10 years ago, photographers figured out that they could take those 3 exposures and stack them, add them in Photoshop or one of the programs. A very hard manual process of doing it. But they could take the properly exposed shadows and the properly exposed highlights and lay them over the properly exposed mid-range. Actually, phone companies like iPhone developed the technology, because they had the processing power in the phone, that they could actually do it in the phone. They could take those 3 exposures, have the phone process the 3 exposures, taking the proper shadows, the proper highlights, and the midtones, and combining it into one image. Then camera companies saw, okay, they're doing it in phones, and the processors in cameras have developed over the past 10 years to get more and more powerful, to the point where most point-and-shoot cameras, if you shoot in JPEG, will do that. They will take 3 pictures of a high dynamic range scene, lots of contrast in it, stack the exposures in the camera, and produce one exposure that looks like it has an extended range. So you can see the detail in the shadows and the detail in the highlights.
I was interested that the iPhone actually sort of led that technology.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other instances maybe in the future, think of the iPhone 20, because there's always perhaps going to be an advantage in the computing power of a phone compared to a camera, does iPhone 20 eventually mean there's no need to get a point-and-shoot camera?
Well, the difficulty with the phone is they will never reach the place where you have an effective zoom. You're always going to be stuck with maybe, zoom ranges between wide angle and moderate telephoto. But long telephoto is not going to happen in a phone.
Because you actually need a physical...
Yeah, you need a physically long lens.
Yeah, right.
So you can maybe buy an attachment that would go on your phone. You can do that now, today. So the phone camera is always going to be somewhat limited in its reach. But as far as the technology goes, sweep panorama, done first in the phone. And now just coming into high-end cameras. Mm-hmm. Many of the exposure tweaks and the sophistication of the exposure system really came out of phone technology, because the phone, you really do want to be able to point and shoot with the phone. You don't want to have to make adjustments and settings and all that kind of stuff. So the automation that we see in today's point and shoot and professional cameras has definitely been driven by the phone market. I suppose eventually they'll make a sensor in a phone that's high enough resolution so that you'll be able to crop it to get the effect of a telephoto. But I don't expect to ever see people taking wildlife pictures unaided with a phone.
Yeah. Let's talk about the book. A lot of photos, a lot of text. I'm imagining that was quite a lengthy project to create that book and get it available at Amazon and Kindle and paper.
Yeah, because I've been teaching this for several years, I had most of the material in my head at least, and I've done PowerPoints with it, and I have a blog, the Point and Shoot Nature Photographer, where I had written a lot of this out at least once and done some illustrations. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. I just needed to rewrite it, sometimes in less technical terms, sometimes just filling in gaps where normally when I was giving a slide presentation, I would talk over the slide. Well, that material had to be condensed and brought into text so that I could actually publish it alongside an illustration rather than just talk it. So the whole, from start to finish, it took me about 6 months to translate what I already knew and what I wanted to say into text. And then it took 3 more months to develop the illustrations that go with it. So about 9 months total. And then once it was done, the process of getting it to Kindle format and whatnot, I experimented several times, with trying to get it to flow as a traditional Kindle book. So it could be read on Kindles. But that was not going to happen.
Is that because it was too difficult to have the photos fall in a pleasing way if people were increasing the font size?
Yes, and the only way to do a Kindle book with lots of illustrations is to have every illustration the same size, so it takes up the whole width of the page on the Kindle. You can't really have it flow around text.
Right.
You can't have text flow around images because the Kindle just doesn't handle that, their processing engine. But they do have what is called textbook format, and textbook format sometimes is called print replica. Allows you to do your layout in whatever program you're using. I use Pages on my iPad, and then publish it as a PDF with the fixed format, and then upload it to Kindle, and they translate it into a Kindle file.
And it can't, if you try to read it on an Kindle, it'll say this document can't be read on the Kindle. That's right. But on a Fire or an iPad or an iPhone, you can read it.
Yes, you can read it on any Kindle app, but not on Kindle machines.
Yeah.
And it, because it had so many illustrations, the file was like 630 megabytes. And the Kindle's limit for an ebook is 635 or something like that. So I could never get it to upload and process. I would upload it and it would sit there and spin on processing for forever. So finally, for the ebook, I had to reduce the resolution of the pictures and shrink it. I used a commercial, not a commercial, but I used a free shrinking service on the internet that reduced the file size of the images to 144 dpi.
At this point, Stephen and I dove quite a bit further into his experience publishing his book with Kindle Direct Publishing. In the process, I learned that KDP now enables an author to print a Kindle version and a print version from within KDP. I'm not sure when this capability was added. I thought that you had to use CreateSpace to publish a paperback book. That's the path that I did for publishing the book for my dad, and that still is an option. If you would like more information about the print and ebook options within Kindle Direct Publishing, I will have a link in the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com that you may find helpful. And now let's return back to Stephen's kitchen in Kennebunk.
Do you have any idea what the split has been in selling e-version and print?
Yes, I looked it up this morning. I've sold in the last, it'll be 3 weeks now, I've sold 40 ebooks and 30 print.
How long has it been out?
3 weeks.
Oh, it's just been out 3 weeks. Okay, good.
Yeah. I don't expect it to sell a lot of copies because I have a friend who's an editor for Houghton Mifflin, and I showed it to her the other day because I saw her at the Birding Expo, and she said, I said, I didn't submit it to you because it's kind of a niche thing. And she said, it's a niche within a niche. so it really is. It could catch on if people become aware of it. But I'll be happy. Mostly, I did it for when I teach.
It sounds like there could be another book that would be more philosophical, because in this book, which is useful, it's really helping people to learn how to take photos. You say some fairly beautiful things about the photographer's eye and how what you're really after is helping people to see what's around them and to share it in a way that changes the world. You've got some pretty high sense of the value of this activity. What if you wrote another book that was on that topic? What were the things that you'd want to say?
I do have some other books in mind, and that would certainly be one of them, to have just beautiful images on one page and a little essay on the other page. I already do some of that in my blogs. But the way I see photography, and again, especially with the advent of social media, and like I'm on Google Plus, and I have 270,000 followers for one of my collections on Google Plus. But the number of excellent nature photographers that I've met, quote unquote, on Google Plus is just astounding. People from India and Russia and Europe and Australia, and people who it's immediately obvious that they share the same eye that I have. They look at the world the way I do. They see beauty in the world. They see the meaning in events that move us. So that experience really has led me to believe that one, it's something that's inherent in us all, but two, it's something that has to be developed in each one of us. Each of us sees the beauty around us and the meaning and the pathos and the feeling that happens around us. And the more we share it, one person to another, the more we realize that we're really all the same. We really share an experience of life on the earth that is not just mine or yours, but that belongs to us all. The concept of beauty cuts across all cultures, everywhere, every kind of people, all economic levels, all, it's universal. And to tap into that and to allow people, more and more people, to share that makes the world, I think, a better place. Because as soon as you realize you're not alone, then it validates everything you're doing. Yes, I might see a beautiful sunrise and really enjoy it. And yeah, there are going to be people standing around me or still talking, playing with their phones and all that kind of stuff. But the fact is that most people in front of that beautiful sunset have the same feeling, a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. And it opens them to a dimension of life that is too often buried under our day-to-day struggles. I want that to happen for people. And certainly point-and-shoot cameras have opened that up, especially in nature photography, wildlife and bird photography in particular. They've opened that up to a whole group of people who couldn't touch it before. It used to be you had to spend $15,000, $20,000 for the type of equipment that would allow you to take a satisfying picture of a small bird in a tree, or an elk on the mountain, or a sunset for that matter. But today, if you're only doing sunsets, you can do it with your phone. If you want to have more reach, then a point-and-shoot camera will do it for you, and quite easily. And again, bring back satisfying picture after satisfying picture after satisfying picture. And then if you share that, I always feel that a photograph isn't done until it's shared. I have thousands of pictures that I don't consider complete because I've never shared them. So you put them out there on social media, and you make connections with other people who see the world like you do, and maybe open some eyes. And that's something that was not possible 10 years ago, and certainly 50 years ago it was unheard of, you undreamt of. To think that a guy sitting in his kitchen in Maine could have a following of 270,000 people. I mean, some of my images have been viewed by 3 million people back when Google was still compiling that. So that kind of reach, that kind of ability to touch other lives is new, and something that a tiny, tiny handful of people have ever experienced before.
I've been speaking with Stephen Ingraham, author of Point and Shoot Nature Photography. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
A couple of items in content. One, there was a nice tweet from Jeff Bezos, who was excited, very excited, that one of his favorite books, Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, won the Nobel Prize, or that author won the Nobel Prize for Literature this week. And I've heard him talk about that book dating back to, I think, 2000 or earlier, as a seminal story that informed some of his choices that led to the forming of Amazon. Another item in content, especially if you have been following the Kindle forum at Amazon, which has been around for years but is going to end on October 13th. It's not a place that I have spent a lot of time at. I know David Rothman has been active there, and I think in earlier years, Bufo Calvin helped a lot of people out there at the forum. But Amazon is reconfiguring things. David Rothman, I'll have a link to a piece that he wrote urging everyone to send an email to Jeff at Amazon.com urging him to keep this forum going. They are opening up a new area for help that is going to be available soon, and they're also referring people to Goodreads. I think there's more and more effort to have some of the things that have been happening at the Amazon.com site happen over at Goodreads. So I am not an expert on the issues here, but people that I respect, like David, are quite exercised about it. And if you also have been active at that Kindle forum, I'd be interested to hear from you. You could send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com, and you might want to send also your thoughts to Jeff at Amazon.com. That's it for this week. Next week's show may be available a little earlier in the week than usual. My guest will be someone you have not heard before, talking about a topic that I'm sure will be of interest to you. More than that, I cannot say at this point. I will say that if you are not subscribed to the free Kindle Chronicles email newsletter, this might be a good time to head over to thekindlechronicles.com and enter your name and address in the form that you'll find on the right side of the page. Just saying. Music for my podcast is from an original Thelonious Monk composition named Well You Needn't. This version is Ra Monk by Eval Monnegat on the Variations in Time, a Jazz Perspective CD by Public Transit Recording. Before signing off, I want to dedicate this episode of the show to my uncle, Bert Tye, who passed away in his sleep last night in Lincoln, Massachusetts at the age of 92. Uncle Bert was the husband of my Aunt Edna, who was my mother's sister, and she passed away a couple of years ago. Uncle Bert was one of the finest men I knew. I wasn't that close to him growing up, but he was always a presence, and whenever I was in his presence, I sensed a goodness and an optimism and a kind of a direct confidence in the fact that things would work out if you were patient and you worked hard. He created his company in 1963, Tye Sales, selling water and wastewater supplies out of his basement, and it grew to be a major small business in Sudbury that his son Kevin now runs, my cousin. He was always the one at Thanksgiving or at a family gathering that would say something that I would remember about how grateful he was for the family and for life itself. He had a quiet way of speaking. He was hard of hearing. I think that might have been a result of his service in the Navy in World War II. So rest in peace, Bert Tye. He's now with my Aunt Edna. And I miss him. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Ocean Park, Maine. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.